Hi, I'm Trish from TrishNewbery.com and welcome to the sew along for the Felicity top. This top is designed for woven fabrics and it's really handy. You can wear it in summer as a tank top with shorts, or you can wear it in winter as a layering piece over a turtleneck, something like that. For this pattern you're going to need woven fabrics, and think something light and floaty, so rayon, chiffon, crepe. I'm going to sew this today in a chiffon. Now it's a very heavy chiffon, it's almost borderline polyester, it's almost borderline a crepe. You could actually put a very light lining here and use this as a fabric. You could almost get away with it with nothing underneath it. So a couple of things you're going to need. Make sure you have a really sharp needle in your machine. Try and put a fresh one in. And I'm going to finish my edges with a serger overlock. So just make sure you test stitch your fabric first and you test stitch your serger before you go any further. For best results with this pattern you're going to need your iron plugged in, because we're going to do a lot of pressing as we go. The one other thing is the neckline, and because it's sleeveless the armholes are finished with a binding. Now you can pre-purchase binding. I've suggested 3 meters. You'll probably need a little bit under that, so around about 3 yards. I've said 3 1/4, but 3 would be fine. And I'm going to use a binder on my machine here, but of course you can put the binding in whichever method you prefer. So the binder I'm going to use, this is a 7mm finish, or it might be a 6mm finish. I think it's 7mm finish. So this one is a 30mm 1 3/16 binder set. Now 30mm 1 3/16 means the width of the binding you cut. Because it's chiffon, I always cut mine 5mm 1/4 of an inch wider. I just find because of the bias sometimes it will come unhooked. So we'll deal with this shortly. Okay, so when you're ready we're going to start off with the front pleats. So here is my front piece. I've placed it right side up and I have marked my drill holes. So just to make it easier to see, I'm just going to pop a couple of pin heads in. And on the pattern I have labelled them 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So what we're going to do is basically pick up these two and fold them like that, and pick up those two and fold them like that. So we want the pin heads to match. So I'm going to put one on top of 2 and hold it in place like that, and then the same here, one on top of 2. So we want the drill holes to be exactly on top of each other. Can be a little bit fiddly, I'm sorry, it's hard to do in front of a camera. This is something you actually need to take a little bit of time with, especially with slippy fabrics. So let me do them like that. Okay, so now we've got 1 and 2 on each end, or almost. Hang on, please bear with me. Right, 1 and 2 together. And now this is right side up. Okay. Right, so not sure whether I should pin them all before we go. Maybe I'll pin the next lot. Okay, so that's our first pleat. Then find 3 and 4, 3 and 4. I'm hoping you can see this. So we're putting this one on top of this mark here. So fold it through the middle, and you need to get pretty close at this stage. It doesn't have to be perfect, we'll rearrange it before we sew it, but just see what you can do. Do your best here about getting these as close as you possibly can. Now I have marked these as drill holes. If your fabric is especially sheer and is subject to any sort of pulling of the threads, you could always just mark them with chalk. Okay, so now I am marking 5 and 6. 5 on top of 6. Okay, so this is our pleats we are going to sew together. Now because I've put the pins on this direction, I'll sew them this direction. So I'm just going to rearrange my work. So rearrange your work so that pins are together and this fold is like so. Now our drill holes are marked at 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch, which means we want to start sewing that distance from the drill hole, continue in a straight line through the other drill hole and the same distance past it. So remember to back tack. So what we're looking for here is just a straight line. You could always mark this with chalk if you prefer. So it really doesn't matter whether you start on the bottom pleat or the top pleat first. The main thing is just make sure all the other pleats are out of the way when you're sewing them. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that those two holes are together and pop my needle, my presser foot down 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch before I start. And what I might do is just do my back tack now. Make sure you go through the centre of the drill hole, but that you are 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch before it. Okay, so to make sure it's all nice and perfect, what I'm going to do is just make sure just the tip of my pin is through the holes, and I'm just going to rearrange it. Okay, and I have got a stitching guide here I'm going to follow, and I'm going to imagine a straight line directly from that drill hole through to this drill hole, and we're going to try and sew as straight as I can. Okay, through that drill hole and past, and then back tack. And now I'm just going to repeat the same thing for the others. Okay, so we have our 3 pleats in place. Now go to your iron and press those so they face towards the hemline, and just make sure you do some quality control work and trim any stray threads that are there. So here I've pressed these down, and I've only pressed the area where we've stitched. I've just left the sides free, so you don't want to touch the outsides, just press down with your iron the middle part there. Now we want to edge finish the shoulders, so take the back yoke and right side up, because we always overlap from the right side. Edge finish the 2 shoulders on the yoke. And now edge finish the 2 shoulders on the front. So all I'm doing is just tidying the edge, I'm not cutting anything off. Now we're going to work on the lower back. So the first thing we're going to do is to edge tidy the centre edge of the lower back. So if we look at our lower backs, we have a pair, which some people call a mirror. There's one cut this way, one cut this way. We're looking to tidy the straight edge on the longest side. So here's the notch going up to the centre back, so we want to tidy this edge here. It has a notch part way down. We need to make sure we can see that notch, also the hem notch through our overlocking, so don't trim them off. Okay, so come back to your plain stitcher and match those edges, the centre back that you've just finished the edge of, and then find the notch part way down from the top and mark it. So we are going to sew a seam at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch from the top, just a short way down, and stop opposite the notch here. Alright, so go to your iron and press that seam open, and continue pressing a 1 centimetre seam on either side all the way towards the hemline. Okay, so this is what you should have. You'll have that seam here pressed open all the way through to the hemline. And you can see that my overlocking wasn't balanced and I adjusted those dials as I went. Clearly I should have checked my overlocking on my serging on one layer instead of the two I did before I started. Anyway, I think it'll be okay. Alright, so flip this over to the correct side, the right side, and we're going to run some top stitching down each side, same distance from the centre line. So I'm going to run mine at 6mm, 1/4 inch. I think that's going to look the most balanced. Obviously you've got up to 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimetre, whatever you prefer. I just like 6mm because I can use my foot width there. So there's no need to back tack, just stitch from the very top to the very bottom on one side and then the same on the other side. Alright, so go back to your iron and give that another press. So when you're working with woven fabrics, it's really important that you sew a seam, press a seam. It helps embed the stitches, it gets rid of all the waviness. You just really need to do it to get a beautiful end product. Just don't skip that step, in my opinion. Okay, so we're going to put the lower back to the upper back, which is the yoke, right sides together. Alright. So what I'm going to do is match the centre notch in my yoke, my upper back, to the centre stitching here. And there's also other notches to match as you go to help you out. So we're sewing this seam at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. Remember to back tack. Let's go to our serger and overlock tidy that edge. Okay, so go and give that a press, and if you can, press it towards the hemline. Place your front and back right sides together, back at the back, front at the front, and we're going to sew together just one shoulder. Now I'm going to sew together just the right shoulder. Sew that at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and press that open when you're finished. I've put my binder into place, and I've just sewn a couple of stitches of the binding just to make sure it's stitching properly. So when I'm using my binder, I'm wanting to sew my binding right side up, so my garment's right side up with the binder, that's wrong side towards you. And I'm going to start with the sleeve first. So come to the shoulder that you've sewn, and we want to bind from the notch in the side seam through the shoulder. We want to bind off at the notch on the other side. So whether you're using pre-purchased binding or self-binding, the method's the same. I might just, I've cut that notch a tad deep, so I don't really want, I haven't cut that particularly well is what I'm saying. So we want that to be a nice smooth run in and off. So I'm going to come maybe a centimetre and a half, so 3/8 of an inch to 9/16 of an inch below, and just start binding on there. I just want to hide that notch nicely. Yep, that all looks fine, so I'm going to continue binding that armhole. Okay, so I'm coming to the notch on the other side, and I'll just bind off. Like so. Now I'm going to bind the neck. I'm binding that from shoulder, so I'm starting at the back, and I'm going to bind from the shoulder seam, the unfinished shoulder, all the way through to the unfinished shoulder on the front. Now we have to secure the other shoulder seam, so right sides together. If you've got a binder, you'll have to take that off to sew a seam, but what we're going to do now is sew this other shoulder seam together in a 1 centimetre seam. Now I'm just going to use my other sewing machine so I don't have to worry about taking my binder off. So just stitch that in a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam, and clip these off as well. So clip them off just over the top of the overlocking line. Sorry, thread snips aren't really designed to cut fabric with. I should be using my scissors. They are as blunt as anything, but they do work on thread. So snip them off like that, right sides together, sew that seam. Make sure it matches perfectly at this neck edge, the binding edge. So locate that underarm notch, and then just start your binding just before that notch, angle it on. Just after that notch there. Okay, so we've finished with the binder, and I'll just go and put my normal fittings back, my normal foot back on. I suggest you go to your iron and give your binding a press. Okay, so let's just finish off the shoulder area here. We want the seam to face towards the back. We just want to tidy that up, to sit it down like that. Now if it's easier for you, you can push it open like that. It really depends. We just want to make sure that this doesn't flap around like this while we're wearing it, really. So if you want to push it to the back, that's fine. If you want to push it to the front, that's fine too. I'm just going to, because I did that pressed open, I'm just going to make sure it's open on the other side. And I'm going to stitch exactly on my binding line to hold that extra bit of binding in place. So quickly back tack it there, just stitch through, and it's only like 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch either side, just to hold that down. Ideally it should be towards the back, but mine's open as well. And do a bit of tidying up. Let's sew the side seam. So the side seam is from the underarm down, so it's the end of your binding down. So match your binding here, so right sides together, front and back. Match the binding. So the seam is 1 centimetre. Three-eighths of an inch. Right, so trim off the extra binding in a straight line with that raw edge. We're going to sew the other side seam, and then we're going to the serger and serge overlocking that edge to tidy. So come around to the other side and do the same seam on the other side. Now just to tidy up the end of my overlocking, what I tend to do is snip it back to 1 inch, a couple of centimetres, roll it back on itself, and then just stitch it down on top of the overlocking line. And do that for the other side as well. Now we're going to sew together the seam that runs perpendicular to that at right angles. So just come to that bottom seam, and we're going to sew across at 1 centimetre. You'll have a notch to match where that yoke joins. and repeat that on the other side. Right, so go to your overlocker and serge finish that edge as well, and the one on the other side. Now I'm working on the hem, so there's a deep hem allowed for. I'm going to overlock, press and plain stitch. You could turn up by 5mm, quarter of an inch, centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and then turn again at the notch mark if you wanted to. It's entirely up to you what sort of hem you want to do. Now the hem is marked by notches there. So next question is, how do you make sure you get a beautiful straight hem when you're sewing with a sheer fabric like a chiffon or a crepe? Well, the key is in the cutting. What I do is I rip my fabric and I always lay my fabric from the hem, my pattern on the fabric from the hem up. So I tear the fabric across, you can see it tear, just to make sure I get a perfectly straight hem. Because it's so much easier and it sits so much nicer from sewing. So with these really sheer fabrics, just buy a little bit extra and be prepared to lose some, because when the fabric shops cut the fabric, because they don't like to tear it, it always ends up really wavy, and where you think it's going to be, it never seems to be. And the last, I did a test garment in this and I lost 20 centimetres, so what's that, nearly 8 inches from where I thought the straight grain was going to be, and that's just literally from cutting it, the lady cutting it at the fabric shop. So if you like tearing fabric, that's great. If you don't, that's fine too, but it does ensure you get a beautiful hemline. I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning of the video, but anyway. Alright, so I'm going to overlock tidy this raw edge from the centre back all the way through to the centre back on the other side, and I'm just going to cut, just go a little bit further in than I normally would, just to trim off all that little bit of fraying and any tunnelling that might have been. Right, so I'm going to go to my iron and I'm going to press this all now. I'm also going to press my hem at 4 centimetres. Can't remember what that is in Imperial, I'll put that in below, and then I will go and stitch that into place. So now I'm going to sew my hem into place. I'm just going to start at the centre back and I'm tucking that overlocking thread in just to tidy it all up. And I'm going to stitch from the right side of my fabric. Right, so go and give that a good press, and your garment is finished. What we do though to wear it is this side seam here where you've done the binding, that gets tucked in. So come to that corner edge here and just pull it up so it tucks in. So it's almost like a pocket, but it's not quite. So you just tuck that in to create the drape, like so. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for buying my patterns. Don't forget to join my Facebook pattern discussion group to get the latest updates and also to see our new pattern releases. And if you like what you see, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I hope to see you again soon.